הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יא נה נה יא נה 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 נה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יא נה נה יא נה 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 נה. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יא נה נה יא נה 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 נה. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. יא נה נה יא נה 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 נה. Bruchim Abayim. Welcome everyone. I am Rabbi Lauren Henderson of Congregation Or Hadash, and we are so grateful to welcome all of you who are here on site and all who are joining us online for this amazing, incredible conversation with the leaders from Shiraka and from leaders in our Atlanta Jewish community about peace and coexistence and possibility. I want to thank all of our sponsors for this evening, for making this event possible: the Consulate General of Israel to the Southeast, the Atlanta Rabbinical Association, the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta, and the Atlanta Israel Coalition, and all of our volunteers and staff here at Or Hadash who helped to put on this event tonight. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce the Consul General of Israel to the Southeast, Anat Sultan Dadon.
Thank you. Good evening, Erev Tov. I think that for the theme of this evening and the discussion, it couldn't be more fitting than to be in a synagogue called Or Hadash, a new light, because I think that is exactly what this group here is about. It's about a new light in the Middle East. Our Bible commands us, Bakesh shalom veradfeu, seek peace and pursue it. And that is what the state of Israel has been committed to since day one, as stated clearly in our Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately, it is still a work in progress, but the achievements of our peace agreement with Egypt in 79, followed by our peace agreement with the Kingdom of Jordan in 94, were incredibly followed last year by the Abraham Accords, which really do bring a new reality to the Middle East. One not just about the cessation of an enemy or war situation. It's about fonding close relations at a very, very high speed. And I think that that incredible story is not only one to be told and shared, as this group is doing, but one that we hope more and more in our region will join for the benefit of all our peoples. So thank you for hosting. Thank you to all our partners, and thank you for being here. Looking forward. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rabbi Alexandria Shuval-Weiner. I am the president of the Atlanta Rabbinical Association and senior rabbi at Temple Beth Tikva in Roswell. And I am your moderator for this evening. And I am so thrilled to be part of this group, this delegation from Sharaka, who are here touring the United States, sharing the vision of their mission in terms of bringing greater peace within the Middle East. So I'd like to first invite our delegation from the far, I'm right, left challenge. So from my far right, we have Dan Fafferman, who is the Communications and Global Affairs Director of Sharaka. And next to him, Dr. Nijat Al-Said, Saudi columnist and author. Next to her is the CEO of Sharaka USA, Omar Al-Baradi. And I do apologize if I am mispronouncing anyone's names. Next to Omar is Sumaya Al-Meheri, Cultural and Social Manager of Sharaka UAE. And finally, closest to me, what I have learned is Johnny at Starbucks and Yaha Mahmid, Israeli Muslim who served in the IDF and a member of the Sharaka delegation. Welcome to you all. Let's give them all a round of applause. So first of all, we want to get to know each one of you. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourselves and what brought you to this delegation. So you can do rock, paper, scissors, or we can start with Dan.
Want to start with you, Johnny?
I'm an Israeli activist. I'd like to call myself a peace activist. My upbringing was with a very negative image of Israel and the Jewish people, unfortunately. I discovered that I was misled, and I went on a mission to educate others around the world and to elevate Israel's image. Later on, I served in the IDF as a combat soldier in the Nachal Infantry Brigade, and I served on Israel's hottest borders. Later on, after I got released, I had the honor of being invited to the delegation, the first Israeli delegation where we're not diplomats, just actual citizens, to Dubai. And I remember the first moment that I saw Burj Khalifa from the airplane window. It was a very surreal moment, especially when the plane landed, and I actually knew that this is it. We're writing history right now. So I'm part of Sharaka, and I went on this on the first delegation. I met Sumaya in Dubai, and then I welcomed Sumaya in Israel. That's how I got involved with Sharaka.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sumaya?
Hello. Shalom. מה שלומכם? ערב טוב. אני שמחה מאוד לראות אתכם פה. That's enough for today. My name is Sumaya. I'm an electrical engineer by profession, and I have a passion for culture and languages. Well, specifically the Hebrew language. I created the first Hebrew-Arabic language exchange platform in the Arabian Gulf, and that was before the Abrahamic Accords. That's how I got to know and get in contact with Israelis and know who they are as people. Later on, I've been selected to be on a delegation sponsored by Sharaka to go to Israel, where I met Yahya and met other Israelis from different and diverse sides of the community, where I discovered that not only Israelis are Jewish people, they are Jewish, Muslim, Druze, and Christians, and other religions. And also, I discovered that Jews are not only of one kind. There are Mizrahis, Ashkenazis, Sephardis, and so many more. And because of my passion in culture and the values of sharaka, of involving everyone and their individuality, that aligned with my values and what I see right, and I joined sharaka.
Awesome. Okay, hi everyone. Assalamu alaikum, shalom alaikum. My name is Omar Al-Busaidi. I'm from the United Arab Emirates. I came to the US through the Fulbright Scholarship in 2019, and I studied at Florida State. So right now I am actually based still in Tallahassee. I graduated, but I don't know, for some reason I'm still stuck in that city. Not for the football team or not for anything else, but until I move slowly to New York. And the reason is because I'm currently interning at the UAE consulate in New York. I handle economic affairs, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the reasons why I joined Sharaka is because for me, I was always in contact with a lot of Israelis and Jews that live in Dubai. The Abraham Accords did not surprise me when UAE normalized relations with Israel, because it came out after we signed the accords that UAE and Israel have been talking for a very long time. Lots of delegations back and forth, and there was a lot of trade between the two countries in cybersecurity, defense, diamonds. We took the hub of diamonds from Antwerp to Dubai, so we're happy we diverted the plane to the UAE. And when the Abraham Accords was signed, I was interviewed by many different news outlets here in the US and Israel and the UAE. The founders of Sharaka reached out to me and said, "Listen, we've seen you're supporting this accords and the relationship between Israel and the UAE. Would you like to represent Sharaka in the US while you're there?" This is a UAE Israeli NGO, but for most Israeli, let's say NGOs, it's most an Israeli that represents it. But now we want to change that. Let's have an Emirati represented here in the US, and I'm glad they did that, because it just will kind of hopefully explain the relationship even more, and then maybe change the narrative in the Middle East. And now I'm here, and this is our first delegation, and we're really honored and happy that it's coming close to the anniversary of the Abraham Accords, and we're never going to forget this, everything that the consulate has organized for us. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Najat Al-Saeed. I'm originally from Saudi Arabia, but I live in UAE, and I'm also dual citizen. I'm Saudi American. I was born and raised in the States. I'm currently a professor at American University of Emirates, and my focus is in media studies. And my major in the media is basically political communication and societal development. And but the message that I want to get out of all of this is basically spreading modernity in the Middle East, because I believe that modernity is the main reason and cause for peace, to bring people together. By modernity, I mean development and progression. After the Abraham Accord, I get really great opportunity to be involved in many webinars, and through these webinars, I met a lot of official people from Israel, from college, from different sectors, and what my main concern was honestly the media and also the diplomatic field. And over there, I got introduced to editor-in-chiefs in Israel, and I started even to write in Israeli newspapers, which I found it very important to get closer to the Israeli community. Even though I am in the academia sector, but I don't believe only in theories. I believe in practice and pragmatism. That's why I want to in order to understand the people, you have to mingle with them. Unfortunately, I'm supposed to be participating in the delegation, but it keep delaying because of the COVID and all of this. But hopefully I will have the opportunity to go and visit, because I want to see the society there. I want to see both Israelis and Arabs and different, in order for me to have a vision to write well about it and to spread about it. If you ask me what involved you in Sharaka, I tell you everything in Sharaka made me involved in it, because it is basically, Sharaka it means partnership, and it brings people together, and this is exactly what peace stands for, bringing people together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? Fantastic. So I'm Dan Fafferman, and I grew up in an Israeli-American household, actually. I grew up in Indiana, and I decided, I'm a Middle East Studies major by background. I made Aliyah, or went back to Israel, actually, in 2005. And the first part of my life was as an IDF intelligence officer and working in national security studies, or national security, not studies. And so my first major interaction with the Middle East outside of Israel was from a certain lens. And I got to know the region very well, but not with the nicest parts of the Middle East. I'd since shifted. I became a think tank fellow. I write on the Jewish world. I speak on Israel and the Middle East. You can catch me on the news. I have a podcast. And right before the Abraham Accords hit, a good friend of mine, who's also an Israeli-American, he's been doing business in the Gulf for a long time using his American passport. He's very well connected. He said, Dan, something's going to happen. I don't know where it's going. I'm forming a business council. We ended up calling it the UAE Israel Business Council. Come with me. Come for the ride. I don't know where it's going, but it's going to be fun. And I usually listen to this guy, so I went along for the ride. And I started mingling first online, COVID, and actually before the Accords, and meeting people and forming connections. I ended up forming what we call the Gulf Israel Policy Forum. It's a network of policy influencers and researchers. So I was having friendly conversations. I was having analytical conversations. As soon as I could, I got out to the UAE, and I didn't know what it was going to lead to, and I was blown away. I was blown away, less by the chance for a business opportunity, although that might happen, but by the people I met and by the ideology of this country, which I realized is so much like Israel in so many ways. And one day Omar and I are going to write a book on this. And I realized just how we in Israel see ourselves as a small country, as an old people with a new country, as connected to our traditions, but looking forward and looking into investing in technology and education and being a lot, punching above our belt, so to speak. I said, this is these people also. This is the UAE. They're incredibly pragmatic. They're incredibly liberal and modern. Nothing I had come to assume and expect of an Arab country in the Middle East. I would see women dressed in traditional dress and men dressed and women in sports bras and shorts running next to them, and everyone's living happily together. And if you want to be an observant religious person, you can. And if you want to be a secular liberal person, you can. And people are incredibly educated and worldly. And I said, this is a model for the Middle East. And the UAE is trying to also export that model to the Middle East. I said, we have to work together. I didn't know what that would be. Of course, I'd been involved. And about a month ago, I got a call from Sharaka, actually from Omar, and said, bro, you got to join Sharaka team. Yeah. You got to join the Sharaka team.
He didn't have a choice. I said, Dan, you're going to join us whether you like it or not.
And I'm so glad I did. As Najat said, it means partnership. And what better way to embody what it is that we're trying to do, not just for our countries, but for the region. We're bringing a new model here, and that we're working so closely together that we see so eye to eye on everything has been, it's been a life-changing experience that you only have maybe once in a lifetime, maybe twice in a lifetime, and I'm thankful for it. And I'm glad to be here with the delegation, speaking to you, and hoping to bridge the United States and specifically the American Jewish community into this story. We need as many allies and friends as we can, and this is just the beginning.
Thank you all. So, so Dan, you just mentioned that Sharaka means partnership. So, and on your website, you have a quote that says, "A peace process is not complete unless it involves ordinary people." So can you all talk a little bit about this idea of partnership, of people-to-people peace? What does this mean? And how does it manifest itself through the things that you are doing individually?
Gladly. I'll kick it off, and then my colleagues can. We're a non-governmental organization, and we're an apolitical organization. That's two important things to point out. And we've had peace treaties or attempts at peace treaties in this region, not just involving Israel, involving other countries and between themselves. And if the people are not there and taught and brought up to believe in this idea of peace and get to know each other, it's not going to happen. And so our leaders took a big step, well, especially the UAE leaders, because that's a big step for them, and they crossed that threshold and reached out their hand, and we gladly took it. And we want to set an example for others in the region to build connections, people-to-people peace. If we can do that, if we can normalize the images of each other, okay, to humanize and not otherize, then that lays the groundwork for other countries and other governments to be able to take this step as well, so that they won't be afraid of their peoples, overthrowing them or protesting or whatever it might be.
I'd like to add something interesting that I saw maybe around 2012, 2013. There was an article in the newspaper that said that the UAE was ranked as one of the countries that has the most socially intelligent people in the world. And the reason is because the UAE is literally a melting pot of so many different races. There's over 200 nationalities that live there, etc. And doing a little bit more research on social and emotional intelligence, I actually published a book. It's called Just Read It. So that's the name of the book. And the reason I wrote that is because I was always interested to understand, the importance of people-to-people connection and being more empathetic, etc. And the most important thing that I realized is communication. That's it can be if miscommunication can be the root of all evil, and communication can be the best thing that can come to us in the world. So that's the reason why I felt like Sharaka really meant something very powerful to me. It reflects what I wrote. It reflects who I am as a person and how I connected with my fellow Israelis during this time. And really, it was citizen diplomacy, as we said earlier, is very, very crucial. The more that we can have this sort of movement from a grassroots level, I think this can go viral. It's very important for all of us to try to spread this energy and tell as many people as possible. And hopefully, yes, the leadership did what they can top level with signing the accords. But once we can transfer this kind of energy amongst the people, hopefully, we'll definitely see a whole new narrative that will come out of the Middle East.
Well, it is as simple as this. The people piece is basically its relationship between the people. So it is bottom up and top bottom, this kind of piece. So common sense, when you follow certain thing for many years, you have to start something else. We tried before the Land for Peace, and it didn't work out for many, many years. Why? Because we recognize especially like a country like UAE, very progressive country, recognize there will never be peace without involving the people. There will never be a complete peace without involving the ordinary people and keeping it like top, bottom, and bottom up. So accordingly, they felt that, if you want to know the word exactly, it's not a deal, it's more like a strategic option to involve the people in order to put the main route for peace. The main route for peace is to bring people together and try to take out all the hostility and hatred out of those people. Because if hatred is there and hostility is there and misunderstanding and miscommunication is there, no matter how many times we sign peace treaties, it won't be peace. I call it maybe no war treaties, but not true peace. So, and the other thing, some people think that we are putting one side over another. No, it is a win-win situation for everybody. When you involve the people, this is the good thing for everybody. And also, how we can, for example, when they talk about certain solutions, how can the solution be if extremism is there? There will never be a statehood under the concepts of hostility and hatred and extremism. It will never be even what this kind of state will give to the people. Will it give it stability? Will it give it prosperity? Accordingly, this peace is different than, it is a warm, we call it warm peace, to bring people together and to show the warmth between the people and to bring more reason instead of just emotion and loud voices and everything. So, and accordingly, we are putting the first roots for peace. That's the main advantage of the whole thing.
When I met my Israeli friends through my language exchange group, I really was worried a bit because it was not yet the Abrahamic Accords, and I was doing something that was unusual, contacting Israelis, even though it's only learning a language. But it was kind of worrisome because of all of the stereotypical and pushed agenda through the media. And, you have a certain image depending on whatever is received by the TV or whatever. And once I got to know the people, I kind of felt like, come on, we almost eat the same food, falafel, hummus, and pitas, and we share lots of pronunciation of the language. I started letting go, and the barriers kind of went down, or like we melted the ice. But the Abrahamic Accord still has not come. And once it happened, it was miraculous because everything now was possible. What you see right now wouldn't be possible 2 years ago. You wouldn't see us sitting like this together. And what I did, like as part of Sharaka events, to bring people together, we started making events like the Lag Ba'omer in Ramadan. It was in Ramadan, and we mashed two celebrations together. We celebrated the Lag Ba'omer in the desert with a bonfire, and at the same time, there was suhoor, which is a dawn meal before fasting. So, and we made another event where we had sessions of how to make khalas, a proper Shabbat, a proper kosher Shabbat in an Emirati household, which was never to be imagined 2 years ago. And when we bring people together in that way and raise awareness about each other and each other's culture and how similar we are rather than our differences, this is how people get warmer in their communication. This is how you create a base of trust. This is how you build on relationships. And these relationships aren't only going to be interpersonal. These might be bases for business, cooperations, interfaith cooperations, and anything else. And if we really look at it, we can gain the fruits of the Abrahamic Accords. And one of those fruits was me announcing to be the first Emirati student to be studying in Israel next October.
In Hebrew.
In
She's
Hebrew,
going to go
yes.
and study in Hebrew.
I'm going to be studying to be a midwife, to be specific. And I already have a degree in electrical engineering, so it's my second bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Well, I think Rabbi, my colleagues have explained it so elegantly.
So fair enough. And actually, I wanted to ask you a question next.
Go ahead.
So, we talk about these cultural meetups and conversation, but you have been you grew up in Israel, you serve the country, and yet in your introduction, you said it was very painful and you experienced a side that was heartbreaking. So could you talk a little bit about that, and then why you would put efforts into working toward working in this organization and working towards creating relationships?
That's a great question. I grew up very isolated from my Jewish counterparts. And not knowing the other side caused a lot of misinformation to leak through. And the moment everything changed, as I say, is whenever I met a Chabad rabbi. He approached me after I finished work, and he offered me, it was just before Sukkot, and he offered me the lulav and the etrog, and he was telling me about how important it is to keep the mitzvot. At this point, I didn't speak perfect Hebrew, so I just shaking my head and going along with it. Yeah. After he was done, I told him, well, I'm sorry to waste your time, but I'm not Jewish. My entire life, I was warned of how my Jewish counterparts in Israel, and especially the religious ones, are gonna treat me as an Arab, as a Muslim in Israel. But here I am standing in front of a religious Jew, and what he told me flipped my life upside down, put me on a new path. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not, what really matters is that you're a good person. It's a very normal sentence, but the fact is that the brainwash that people get is a very black and white image, and it's a double-edged sword. As soon as it's challenged by even the slightest act of kindness, the slightest act of breaking that stereotype, it creates a crack in that idea. And that's all of what I try to achieve, that little crack, and it will keep on expanding more and more. I won't go into how many times I've had conversations with individuals that were debating me on if Israel that and if Israel is that. And after a couple of years or after a couple of months, I've gotten messages from them saying, well, thank you. You brought us to another side that we were never exposed to. Growing up in Israel as a minority definitely has its challenges, but I decided not to complain about the challenge, about the problems that we have, and go out and try to change them and bring solutions. So yeah.
A question for everyone. Sure. So the work that you're doing, have you seen the impact of your efforts on your own individual communities? Have you been able to bring those cracks and widen them? Yeah. And bring understanding?
Okay, I can just tell you. So one of the things that I have a big passion for is entrepreneurship, startups, and everything. And I wanted to mention this. One of the books that fascinates me is Startup Nation. You know, it's all about Israel, and I love it because the UAE Minister of Economy recently, when he was interviewed, he said that if Israel is a startup nation, the UAE is a scale-up nation. Because a lot of things in the, if you set up a business in the UAE, you can scale up to the region, like to the GCC, to Africa, to Asia. And I think Israel and the UAE realize that potential. And this is why the Abraham Accords is reaping the benefits now more than I think any other two states right now. I think actually a lot of American companies are afraid they're going to lose business to Israel because now that the Abraham Accords is signed, I mean, we have Israeli avocados. We used to get them from the US, but now we're getting it from Israel. So whoever is selling avocados from here to the UAE, I'm sorry, we have Israeli avocados. It's closer to us, and now they're thinking of building a road or a train, a rail track from the UAE to Israel, right? Maybe Dan can tell you more later.
Avocados are actually labeled from Israel.
Yes, exactly. They're labeled. Yes, and there's a lot of things. There's also kosher wine, and there's everything there now from Israel. What it brought down is this barrier for doing business and trade, and of course through commerce, you learn about cultures, etc. I'm actually right now talking to maybe 2-3 different people on a personal level that want to do business with me because. And they're from Israel, and they would have never had a chance to do what they wanted to do before. So unless they probably would have gone through a third person in Switzerland or something, or come with a different passport. So for me personally, entrepreneurship for myself and also for many other friends of mine, it's opened a lot of doors. I have a lot of my Emirati friends who tell me, Omar, tell me what unicorns exist in Israel right now, and help us, open, to invest in those companies. So, and of course, you look at so many of these startups, like from Monday, Waze, all these big Israeli tech companies that have made millions and billions in the world. I think this is something that's going to open the eyes to a lot of people in the UAE to invest in Israel.
Through those investments and cultural relationships, do you see the work of Sharaka positively impacting efforts of peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Yeah, I'll be happy to touch on that. So, I'll start with the broad, and then I'll tell you how that reflects to that. We've talked about, and we will talk about how Arab world perceptions are going to be changing as a result of this, and my colleagues can expand. But in Israel, of course, we have different communities in Israel, and many Israelis are further to the right. Many have not met Arabs or had meaningful relations with Arabs or had negative relations with Arabs because we're in a conflict with some of the Palestinians who are near us, including today a rocket was fired at northern Israel. The community I live in, there are many people, when I went to the Gulf and came back from the Gulf and they see me online with all my friends, are you scared? Do you feel safe there? Can a woman walk around there? Do they know you're a Jew? Do you wear a kippah? And, like, guys, this is the safest place I've ever felt in my life. I go into kosher, I'm speaking Hebrew openly in the streets. There is, you have no idea what you thought is completely not true. Certainly about the UAE. And so, like Yahya said, it's putting that crack in the stereotypical understanding of Arabs. Well, it turns out the Arab world is incredibly diverse and individualistic, and there are many people with moderate views and different views, and etc. And so when they hear it from me, yeah, okay, they laugh at me. I don't know if in Israel, when you call someone a leftist, it's like an insult in Israeli society. That's how Israeli is. Oh, you're a left. But they listen to me, and I have my platforms, and I'm not the only one. 200,000 Israelis have gone to Dubai so far. 200,000. And that's with COVID times. And the more this happens, the more we get to know them as people, their culture, the more we get exposed to the Arab world, the more they get exposed to us. And that's before they can come to visit Israel. And that's just, from my story from an Israeli side, we're humanizing and not otherizing. And I think it's happening. I can tell you within Israel it's happening. Connecting that to the Palestinian issue, look, we're not trying to solve that. Of course, we'd love there to be peace between Israel and the entire world. We'd love for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be solved. We're not here to tell the government how to do that. What we hope is that if we can build up this groundswell of humanizing, of normalizing, it'll make things a lot easier. Right now, there is not popular support among the Palestinians, nor probably amongst Israelis for any kind of peace efforts. Okay, if either side tried to do it, they would not have the political legitimacy to do that. If we continue our work, and yeah, we're starting on the edges, we're starting with the UAE, we were hoping to have a delegation in Morocco last week. Because of COVID, we had to postpone it. We were hoping to bring another delegation to Israel. We brought out a delegation to do, again, COVID, it's really hard. We do a lot of online stuff, WhatsApp groups, webinars, videos, every social media platform you can imagine. The more you do that, the more you humanize, and then the politician's job will be a lot easier.
Topic of normalization. It is often seen by some people in the area as controversial. So I'm curious how this has manifested since the signing of the Accords in 2020, and have any of you personally had felt pushback from the people that you, friends, family, folks at home, who might really question the work that you're doing?
Actually, I've received lots of support from family and friends. Although you can't really say, to be realistic, you can't really say everyone is on board with it. There are people who have other opinions about it. There are other people who are against it, not necessarily from my family, maybe from my big number of friends. There are parts of them who are might be against it. But the way I deal with that situation is I accept that there will always be conflict. My job is not to solve it. Whether I believe in what I do is right, I will follow the path that I see is better for all. And I can listen. I can understand. If I think that there are things that I don't like, I condone. But you cannot change everything you like, and you can focus on the positivities, especially that the positive feedbacks to me were the majority. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. So this next question is directed to Najat and to Sumaya specifically. So we're in a room right now where our council general is a woman. We have two senior rabbis who are women. So I want to talk about women. Just a quick question. So can you speak to the issue of women's rights and equality in the Arab world? We have two women who are both very, very bright, very creative, who are doing amazing cutting edge things. So I'm asking you to talk about the entire Arab world and the rights of women.
Well, this is a very, very big question. You're talking about the Arab world in general. And as Dan mentioned, the Arab world is so diverse. And even the Arab Gulf countries that are very close politically and culturally, there are many differences between them. Like, for example, the situation in UAE is quite different than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is different than Kuwait. Kuwait is different than Bahrain. And imagine the whole Arab world. I don't know how to make it short because this is my major, honestly. I'm trying, my PhD thesis was in media and social development, particularly women's empowerment, fighting poverty, illiteracy, and violence against disadvantaged women. So in Saudi Arabia, for example, let me give you a brief example. There's a huge difference between the women who are living in the cities and the women who are living in the countryside. Saudi Arabia is a big country. And when you meet those women who are like from the big cities, you might see them more Westerners than the Westerners themselves. They are all Western educated. So, some of them, their English even is better than their Arabic. They have mostly high degrees. But this is different in the countryside. This is number one. Number two, because of Saudi Arabia, because of its size and its political and religious weight, it has been through a lot, which UAE hasn't been through. For example, there was a period called the awakening period, which is, we call it in Arabic, Ahd al-Sahwa. This is basically because of two very huge events that happened in Saudi Arabia. One is internal and one is external. The internal is the Juhayman al-Atabi attack on the Holy Mosque. And he basically attacked Saudi Arabia because it's not holy enough. It's not virtual enough. They think women were so much like into, like they were exposed, not covered. And from that moment, everything was shut down, you know. And even the external event was the Khomeini revolution. He also attacked Saudi Arabia because of that. So over there, like in Saudi, what happened? Women were so much getting highly educated, but in the labor, it is the lowest among the whole Arab Gulf countries. You see, for example, UAE and Bahraini women are higher in the labor market, in the job market, more than Saudi Arabia. But after like MBS now opened up the country, it's catching up. Mohammed, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, opened up the country, and especially for women. So now you can see women are working in different sectors. They are now, you see women are even diplomats in the political sector. They're catching up. While this has not happened in the UAE. That's why you see in the UAE, for example, women's involvement in the job market, 2/3 of the women, of the people who are occupying the job market in the public sector are women. So, and up to 30 to 40% of women are in leading positions. And so this is really big because the country was consistent all over. There wasn't up and downs. So this is, I'm just giving you a very, very brief thing in the Arab Gulf countries. And I really recommend for you to read the book, Women and Development in Arab Gulf Countries, written by Dr. Jamal Al-Suwaidi. He's one of the well-known scholars in the UAE. And if you are interested, you can read my book, Screens of Influence and Social Development.
So in the UAE, is that working?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So in the UAE, since the start, the founder, Sheikh Zayed, may he rest in peace, he always encouraged women to seek education. And he always encouraged women to join the workforce. In the UAE, we have the highest number of women ministers in the Middle East, which is 11 women ministers. We also have equal pay, which is, I think, it's the only one in the Middle East. And the UAE has taken care of women's rights and made it the most important thing to take care of in its community, where even, like, for example, if women were divorced or widowed, the government would take care of them in a certain way. There's widow housing, there's divorcee housing, and financial allowances. There's also higher percentage of college educated women than there is men in the UAE. That's because women do, and they are encouraged always by the government and their families, and they're brought up to be educated. It could be seen in many aspects, and these are just briefly just a few things I can share with you.
That is short, if I can. I had an honor of meeting the UAE, I believe the Arab world's first female combat fighter pilot, who is now a colonel in the Emirati Air Force. And she's a close friend. She's the sister of a close friend of mine, and I was hosted in her home, and it was unbelievable. And she's paved the way. I don't know if do we have female combat fighter pilots in Israel?
Yeah.
So I was stunned, and she's paved the way for many other Emirati women to follow in that path.
And the significant thing about her name is Mariamal Mansouri. She took part in the coalition against ISIS in Iraq, and actually she's the one that there was this operation where she strategically attacked ISIS positions in Iraq, and that went like viral. In fact, because of that operation, she and her family, through their Twitter trolls and they were able to like get to her accounts, and they were like threatening her. So even the government is like protecting her and everything else. But she's that, like as Dan mentioned, she's paved the way for a lot of other female combat fighters. And one more thing I wanted to tell you, like there is actually quite a number of advantages that UAE women get as opposed to men. So I'll give you I'll talk about entrepreneurship. If I want to open a business in the UAE, I have to, let's say I'm a consultant, I have to have an office, like I have to go rent out an office and everything. So the cost for me might be higher. But women in the UAE, they can open a business at home. So they can register, they have the right to register a business at home. It's much more cheaper, and they're giving that opportunity to women. Women in the UAE can retire earlier than men. So for them, if they work a maximum of 15 years in the government department or in the public sector, they can retire much earlier than men can. Men have to work an extra 10 years or so, which is better. Keep the men outside the house. But I mean, so they can give the women their rest. So like women have a lot of advantages in the UAE.
So that leads to a question about modernity.
Yeah.
So do you think that the Abraham Accords are a result of more modern thinking across all of the countries, or is just this a natural progression of civilization?
That's a really good question. I think the countries that agreed to the Abraham Accords were there already, as internally, which is why they were able to officially accept the Abraham Accords. We know that we'll focus on the UAE and then Bahrain and Morocco also. Sudan is a different story and won't get into that. Part of the reason why the leadership was able to do what they had been doing covertly and having relations with Israel, economic and strategic relations with Israel, and bring it overtly is because they had a good sense that it would have popular support. The only reason they could have popular support is because the populations were more modernized and moderate and multicultural in their acceptance. And so I think I would say that the Abraham Accords were a natural progression of this. And then now that it's formalized, together we can bring even more modernization now to the rest of the region.
So how are you individually different today because of your relationship with Sharaka? And two-point question, what would be your hope for the impact that Sharaka makes in the next 5 to 10 years?
So what changed for me, especially after the Abraham Accord, I'll have to say that us Israeli Arabs, we are, in Israel, we are treated as Arabs, but outside of Israel, we're full-on Israelis. So we do find ourselves in this gray area where we were not granted access to many Arab countries because of our passports. So the only information that we got from the Gulf countries was mainly from movies and stuff that was from the internet, basically. And as my colleagues have mentioned, there's a lot of foreign workers as well who are working in the Gulf area generally. And those workers, some of those workers come from like Jordan and the West Bank and stuff like that. So we would hear like information circling. Unfortunately, it was kind of a negative image about the lifestyle, stuff like that. But I was very surprised to see that as soon as it was possible for Israelis to visit the Gulf country, the United Arab Emirates, the same day I remember, the first day I was on Facebook and I couldn't find one single person who was not in Dubai. Everybody was in Dubai. So it kind of like showed me, first of all, when I was in Dubai, it really broke the stereotype. And second of all, it really shows how much Israelis are embracing, and they would jump at the chance of breaking the stereotype and meeting new people and building bridges of peace. So it was that's really what changed me.
Thank you.
So what changed for me after the Abrahamic Accord is finding my voice to raise awareness to youth, to people, to teach them what they do not know, to break stereotypes. I have always been a strong woman, but I have found the courage to stand up against ignorance, because ignorance always, ignorance is like the cause of, let's say, fear, and a person would always hate what they fear. And when you hate what you fear, there will be crime. And when there is crime, there will be chaos. So unless we stand up to raise awareness and break these stereotypes and change the wrong image that is being pushed from like through wrong agenda or like through specific agenda, then chaos will reveal. So yeah, that's what changed for me after the Abrahamic Accords, and what I hope to see is for more people seeing us as an example here of real warm people-to-people peace. Because there were countries, as my friends mentioned, who Israel created peace with, but it was a cold peace. It was only signed on papers. People do not know about each other. People do not deal with each other. And here we are setting an example that we want to see in the Middle East.
You know, the UAE is a country of superlatives. Like, we have the tallest building in the world. We have the fastest roller coaster in the world. We have the longest zip line in the world. That for me was great, but it wasn't enough, because when I would meet with my Israeli friends, maybe in the US or anywhere else, there was that question that would come about, like, you know, over the last few years, you know, this is great, you guys are doing this. Oh, I wish I could come and see it. I wish I could do this, etc., etc. So the Abraham Accords, what it changed for me is the opportunity for the Israelis to finally come openly, just as Yahya mentioned. And all the other people around him and his friends that could fly directly to Dubai in 3 hours, and flying over Saudi Arabia. The fact that Saudi Arabia allowed Israel to fly over their airspace, this is a huge deal, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it may seem like it's okay because I know it's like thousands of miles away, but I'm telling you, it's very, very significant. The winds of change are here, and we're like in the middle of history right now. So for me, that's what has changed, and I'm very proud of my government for making that happen. And hopefully, I look forward to seeing other countries normalizing, okay, we formalized the relationship. We didn't normalize it. So just putting it out there. But I hope other countries normalize relations with Israel.
Can you please clarify the question? Is it individually or in the country?
Both. So the first part is how are you different, or what change do you feel? And what is your hope for the next 5 to 10 years for the region?
Okay, thank you. Individually, honestly, nothing has been changed, because this was my idea a long time ago. The only change that happened, I became more courageous to write it openly. Before, I was writing about it subtly, because my writing was mainly, as I said, the message was on modernity, and I see that this piece, this warm piece, is part of boosting up the modernity, and I always emphasize on secularism in my writings, dividing religion out of state. I don't care about whoever's religion is, and let us do politics away from religion. This is most of my emphasis. So even in this type of writing, I became bolder after the Abraham Accord to write about it. And honestly, I feel so safe in the UAE. What makes me feel safe in the UAE, because the leadership is so much aligned of what I'm doing. That's why I'm feeling so safe. It's like basically all what the UAE government is doing is exactly like what I'm writing about. So here I'm feeling safe about it. So that, and after the Abraham Accord, I felt even safer. So this is the impact of the Abraham Accord on me individually, being more open about it. Regarding the impact on the whole region, I think after 5-10 years, the region will shift from idealism to pragmatism, from being emotional to being more rational. Because this conflict has been always interpreted in a very impulsive and emotional way. And I'm so glad this Abraham Accord happened, because this is a very rational way. And it can, as I said, it's like win-win situation. If I want to help my brother, I have to tell him you are wrong here. I couldn't just side and being biased just because this person is closer to me religiously. This is not how you solve conflicts. So here you have to use your reason and logic. And if you want to be totally emotional, you're not gonna help even the person that you want to help. So I see this is the first shift. And also, UAE is doing a great job in changing the curriculum. So here, they change even in the educational system, that Judaism is part of the region. And the Abraham Accord is something very important for the prosperity of the country. So see how they are changing the mindset of the generation. One of the things also that I proposed after I saw this, I was encouraged to write about, I told them, if you want to help the Palestinians, please don't just pay money for them just to build schools. Help, the UAE has to be involved in creating the curriculum to the Palestinians. Because we, especially Palestinian children, we have to know what those children are fed, with what is their educational system. Because what UAE is doing for its generation is amazing. And I want to see that in other countries.
Absolutely. You know, the Abraham Accords were, I'll say this ambitiously, the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Here.
There's still an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But now that this Gordian knot of 22 countries all being involved in something very small and isolated and regional makes it solvable. What Najat was saying, let's take out the emotions, let's take out the unnecessary complexities. It minimized it. The UAE can now be involved in a positive way. It's the beginning of the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. That's a major regional change. If Sharaka in 5 to 10 years exists in every Arab country, I think I'll be happy. If we're facilitating these dialogues, not just between Israel and the UAE, and we have representatives in Bahrain, and we hope to have representatives in Morocco soon, and we have people literally from every Arab country approaching us, how can we help, how can we get involved? We had someone from Pakistan, someone very senior from Pakistan approach us recently. How can we get involved? It's not an Arab country, but it's a major Muslim country. This is our vision. This is where we'd like to be. On a personal level, I had dreamed as a student, as a younger adult, that I would get to be involved somehow in bridging between Israel and the Arab world. That was always my dream. And I gave up on it because I didn't join the foreign ministry and I didn't join other places that did it. And I tried other career paths and all interesting. And when the Abraham Accords happened and when especially Sharaka came about, I found personally an opportunity to take all my skills, all my knowledge, all my connections, all the consulting jobs I've done in marketing and PR and podcast production and research and writing and channel it into one creative outlet that we all so truly believe in. So on a regional level, I think we're in a historic moment. We don't always get to say that. We are at a historic moment. On a personal level, I think it's also a life-changing moment that I'm still pinching myself all the time that I get to live through this.
Wait, I want to add something that he didn't say. So Dan, I think one thing from a personal level, what changed is I think the Abraham Accords is testing his patience because me and Sumaya were always constantly late to different meetings. It's like, oh my, I've never seen people like be so late to things. Like, why can't you just be on time? Like, why can't
he can't grasp the concept of Arab timing.
Yeah, so I think it's the Abraham Accords personally it's testing his patience. I just had to add that.
We talk about Jewish time, Emirati time is like a whole different level.
Yeah, so we're learning. This is what we're going to get from this platform, you know.
For Emiratis, 5 minutes means
maybe 50 minutes.
It means
we forgot the 0.
5 minutes to an hour.
So So
let me ask one last question, then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. The question is, for those who want to help push this forward, how can we do our part from where we are to help move this person-to-person dialogue forward?
Well, there's a couple of ways. The simple way is we have our, bring that forward.
I have to do this because I feel maybe not everybody can see, but there you go.
There.
Yeah, okay.
Hang on a second. These folks here can see me. On the easiest level, connect to all our social media platforms. Share the crap out of everything we're doing. Let's spread positive momentum. That's what we're trying to do. There's been a narrative in the U.S., part of the reason why we're here, that, oh, the Middle East and its conflict and, and we're here to tell you that there's a different story happening, that this generation and that a lot of people around the world not only want to see something else happening, but we're making it happen. So, social media has its pitfalls and its dangers, but it also gives us so much opportunities. And so connect to us on all our platforms, help spread this message, help spread our content, but also other people who are doing similar things, and spread this positive message. I've
Be
learned,
part of awareness.
yeah, I've learned recently in the past few years, I stopped talking to trolls and, trying to debate people on social media one-on-one. It gets you nowhere. Spread more and more and more positive messages like the kind that we're trying to spread. And although we're not here on a fundraising tour, if you really want us to help expand, you're also welcome to contact us, and you can help us grow. And that's certainly another way to help us out.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'd like to take questions from those who are here in the room. Sir, and if you could speak very loudly.
And introduce yourself.
Jeff Hirschhorn. I was wondering, you're all talking about how the Abraham Accords have impacted the Arab world.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the current coalition government in Israel would have been possible without the Abraham Accords. Because now there is an Arab party that is now part of the governing coalition. And I'm wondering if that was made possible by...
That's a really interesting insight that I didn't think about. It may be, if you're not familiar, there is for the first time, but it's actually the second time. The first time there is an Israeli Arab and a conservative Islamist Arab party in the Israeli governing coalition, which includes right-wing Jewish parties. It may be. I could also think about the fact that one of the things that almost kept Netanyahu in office was the success of the Abraham Accords. So it might actually, two things can be true at once, and that might be the case. I hadn't thought of that. Absolutely, and I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting. Thank you.
Back in the back here.
You talked about opening trade barriers. Can you talk a little bit about cultural exchanges? Will it be combined UAE, Israeli symphonies and music? Will it be combined?
It's already happened.
It's happening.
It's happened.
Crossing borders?
Yep. Since the accords were signed, there's been around 86 MOUs that were signed between the two countries, and this was mostly around social and cultural government entities between the two countries. We've already seen Israeli musicians going to the UAE. There's actually an Israeli soccer player who plays for a club, a UAE soccer club. Actually, I played at that club. It's called Al Nasser Club. I was a goalkeeper back in the days when I could.
Of course, you're like 6'4".
Yeah, I'm like 6 something. So he
The
plays there.
rugby
The rugby teams as well. The Israeli rugby team and the UAE rugby team played a match there. You also saw a lot of judo and jiu-jitsu Israeli fighters. I think we have somebody who's jiu-jitsu. He looks like he's jiu-jitsu in the back. He's a dance friend. So like there's quite a number of activities that took place, culturally between the two, more than just the economic side. And I think you're going to see even more. In fact, there is an Emirati that is currently studying at a private university called IDC Herzliya in Israel. So his name is Mansour al-Marzougi. So this is the first Israeli who's there. Of course, Sumaya is the first Emirati to study in Hebrew in an Israeli university. And of course, a very good friend of mine, her name is Michal Divon. Michal, she was based in New York. She's Israeli American, and she used to write for a paper here, but now she works for a UAE English publication called Khalij Times. So within like less than a year, all of these things had happened. So there's even be more.
And we're actually planning already all sorts of, look, COVID has slowed all of these kinds of things down. We're already planning to bring over musicians and artists and have collaborations between Israeli and Emirati, and soon, like I said, Moroccan. Journalists are exchanging. Think tanks have all done conferences and signed agreements with each other. It's really broad on all levels.
Hey, well, this is, first of all, thank you for being here. It's very inspiring. I just really love this panel. So thank you to everybody who put it together. My question is not really directed to anybody specifically, but you mentioned before that there's about 200,000 Israelis that visited the UAE. I looked it up, and only 12,000 Israelis visited Egypt after the 1979 peace agreement. Why do you think it worked so well this time, and opposed to the last time we've had a major signing between Israel and an Arab country?
As you know, the Abrahamic Accords work so much differently than the peace agreements that happened in Egypt and Jordan, where in Egypt and Jordan, it was only something that happened between the governments. People of the country, the population, were not informed about their counterparts. They were not given the education about them. They were not even taught to accept the Israelis. They were always painted in their media as the enemy. They were still,
to this day.
Yeah, until this day. But like from that time until now, this is how the Israelis are portrayed. So usually Israelis fear for themselves when they want to go to these countries. On the other hand, the Emirates is a multicultural place. We have more than 200 nationalities in our country from various faiths. We have churches, synagogue. We have the biggest Hindu temple in the Middle East, which displays how we are a tolerant country. We accept people from different backgrounds. We accept people from different lifestyles. So when the doors opened for the Israelis, there was a first economical plane that arrived. There was a group of Israelis that came to explore. And because of all the good feedback that they brought back to Israel, more and more and more people were excited to come, because people, my friends, I actually went to welcome one of my friends that was on that first economical plane. Is it economical plane?
Commercial.
I
plane.
thought I was saying the wrong word.
It's okay.
It's a commercial. Yeah, it was the first commercial plane, and once they saw the Emirates and its hospitable nature, and how people are very welcoming, and it's comfortable for everyone, not only the Israelis, because Israelis were so surprised. They were like, "Are you treating us that way because we're Israelis and this is the Abrahamic Accord?" I'm like, "No, don't worry. It's not about you. It's just us."
That's one thing that's very important to highlight. There was never war between the UAE and Israel, which makes a lot of sense. That's why, like with Jordan and Egypt, the reason, maybe one of the reasons, is that cold peace, and I think it was a very bitter sort of pill to swallow for either side or whatever. So, but the fact, thank God, that there was never war or conflict between the two countries helped the numbers that you see from the UAE, so from Israel to the UAE.
I'll add something. Najat mentioned earlier the education system. What I noticed there, and looking at the UAE, studying how it works, it's it's probably the most efficient and effective government and bureaucratic system I've ever seen. And I say this as someone who's been in government and who's studied governments. So when they make a decision on a strategic level, you can be sure that it was well thought out, and then it's implemented on a governmental level across the entire society better than anywhere I've ever seen, anywhere I've traveled or studied. And so they started, and after realizing the threat from extremist Islam years ago, reforming the education system, and then I think, we've been talking about it in different panels here, it seems that they made the decision to move towards normalization years ago, the Ministry of Tolerance that they opened a few years back. And you can see it all across society. So it's a whole of society approach that Egypt and Jordan never took, whether because they didn't want to or they're not capable of implementing it. And you see it from the educational curriculum to positive messaging in the media to positive mentions of Jews and Judaism and just general inculcating an ethos of tolerance and multiculturalism. It's really baked into the DNA, where I don't know if the older generation was brought up with this. The older generation was brought up of the Israel of the occupier, or the Israel that you see in Al Jazeera and all these things. And so it's not something that happens overnight. It's something I think they built over time. And if I may be frank, Najat can correct me, I see Saudi Arabia going in that direction and laying the stones for that, so they can make that decision one day too.
Hopefully.
There was right here.
So communication is a common theme here, and there's infinite possibility here. But we also look at an emotional versus a rational thought process and response. I'm curious what you're coming up against in the bigger picture, geopolitically, and how this is impacting how you streamline your approach to deal with the polarity and some of the difficulties that you confront with organizations, with political regimes that try to undermine the phenomenal work that you're doing.
Are you talking about the problems that UAE is facing regarding that, or what exactly? Who's?
For Sharaka.
For Sharaka.
We honestly, we haven't really received that much backlash. Most of the time, it's a lot of positive support and people sending us messages saying, well done, you guys are very brave for taking this step, etc. I can tell you one thing for sure, like us as individuals, sometimes people call me a sellout, or they call me a traitor, or they call me whatever, but I get it here and it comes out here immediately, instantly. I don't let these things affect me. As they say, haters gonna hate. So it doesn't bother me at all. And the good thing is, like I said, in the UAE, as Sumaya mentioned earlier, there's a huge consensus and support majority from the people that live there, not only from Emiratis, even people from other parts of the world. It's frankly speaking, it really doesn't affect, because I think if we got way too much, it probably would have just maybe told us, let's relax, let's not speed this whole process of doing what we're doing, this advocacy. But because we're getting this support from the people, this is what kind of drove us to do this as well. For me, I'm good with doing my work at the consulate and everything else. But the fact that I have people telling me, go on, do this, continue, build that relationship with the different Jewish communities, whether it's here in the US or in Israel, that's what keeps me going. So that's to answer your question. I hope that answers your question.
Can I add just one point? Honestly, it varies. From the Arab Gulf countries, I see personally a lot of support. And even, as I mentioned, even the Arab Gulf countries varies. From UAE, there's a big support, even especially from the younger generation. I see tremendous support from the Saudis. Some of them say it publicly, but most of them send me private messages. What you're doing is great. Keep doing what you're doing. You can talk. It's hard for us to be explicit. You're living in UAE, just do it. But what you're doing is amazing. But I found other clashes from other Arab countries. But the main thing that I recognize, honestly, from what we're doing in Sharaka and what in general after the Abraham Accord, and this is so important, I see it. I see some Egyptians really became more open about the people-to-people peace in Israel. Something that I haven't seen before the Abraham Accord. They got courageous of what UAE has been doing. Before, they were afraid if they were doing that, they will be attacked by the Arab public. They will call them traitors, they will call them whatever. But after they saw what UAE has done, especially from the people, now I can see the difference among the individual Egyptians, because I travel there and I know them. So I can see the difference. And I believe that will have a huge impact on the Egyptian media. The Egyptian media is so influential in the Arab world, especially the movies, and the drama. So I can see there will be an impact. The hostility that we saw a couple of years ago before the Abraham Accord, I don't think it will happen afterwards. And this is so important and influential, not only in Egypt, in the whole Arab world.
Thank you all so much. I know there are so many more questions, but we are going to wrap up this discussion. We are so grateful, and I'd like to now invite Rabbi Henderson to close out our evening.
Shukran, Tadaraba. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. As you were just speaking, Najat, I thought about a phrase that I learned in the entrepreneurial innovation world called the adjacent possible. That when something happens, something groundbreaking happens, it actually makes it more possible for the next person to go that far and farther, and so on and so forth, kind of like this domino effect. And so I'm just feeling very, very inspired in wake of this conversation to see what adjacent possible will be after this. We started tonight by singing Hine Matov U'ma Na'im Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, how good and pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to sit together. And it's like such a simple thing, but after this year, just sitting together has so much ramification for our possible future together. So I'm gonna be thinking of this image anytime I sing that song.
Thank you.
Anytime in the future, this night will come to mind. So thank you all. You're invited to join us for refreshments out in the courtyard. Hope you stick around. And thank you again to all of our sponsors for making tonight possible.
Thank you
Good night.
for having us.
Thank you for hosting us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.